Netflix has spent the past few years perfecting its true crime formula, with several high-profile series becoming global talking points almost overnight. Few projects exemplified that more than Ryan Murphy's Monster anthology, which began with Dahmer, Monster, the Jeffrey Dahmer story. The controversial hit combined prestige drama with horror aesthetics, turning a real-life serial killer into one of streaming's most talked-about subjects. However, when the anthology returned with Monsters, the Lyle and Eric Menendez story, the result was far less cohesive and arguably Netflix's biggest creative stumble in the true crime space. When the Monster formula broke. The original concept behind Monster was simple yet provocative. Each season would explore a notorious killer, diving into the psychology and cultural impact behind their crimes. The Dahmer season delivered on that premise with uncomfortable precision, grim, cinematic, and unflinchingly honest about both the horror and humanity in its subject matter. But the Menendez Brothers case was a different story entirely. Unlike Dahmer or the upcoming season's subject Ed Gein, Eric and Lyle Menendez were not serial killers. Their crime, the 1989 murder of their parents, was a single act of violence rooted in years of alleged abuse and family dysfunction. While the case captured the public's imagination, it didn't fit the same horrific mold as other monster subjects. The result was a season that felt tonally adrift, too dramatized to be a courtroom procedural, yet too restrained to function as psychological horror. When fiction overpowered fact. While Dahmer was criticized for its disturbing realism, Monsters, the Menendez Brothers story drew backlash for the opposite reason, its heavy use of fictionalized drama. The show's creative liberties, including the over-sexualized portrayal of the brothers' bond and the sensationalized depictions of their upbringing, alienated both audiences and the real Menendez family, who remain incarcerated. Many viewers felt the narrative crossed a line into exploitation, sacrificing accuracy for shock value. Critics also noted that the season lacked the thematic focus that made Dahmer resonate. The tension between morality and monstrosity was replaced by melodrama and style-over-substance storytelling. Even with a talented cast and Murphy's signature production polish, the series couldn't escape the feeling that it was forcing the Menendez case into a franchise formula that simply didn't fit. A lesson in mismatched material. The show's performance reflected that creative mismatch. While Dahmer became one of Netflix's most-watched shows of all time, Monsters attracted barely half the audience. Reviews were mixed, with critics calling it directionless, inconsistent, and disconnected from its own concept. For an anthology meant to explore society's obsession with true monsters, focusing on the Menendez brothers, whose motives and moral culpability remain complex, diluted the franchise's identity. The road back with Ed Gein. Now, with Monster, the Ed Gein story streaming on Netflix, the anthology appears to be finding its way back to familiar, if disturbing, territory. The new season stars Charlie Hunnam as the infamous 1950s killer whose crimes inspired Psycho and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. By returning to a more historically distant figure, one tied to genuine horror roots, Monster seems poised to reclaim the unnerving tone that made the Dahmer seasons so effective. The time period alone sets the Ed Gein story apart. Set in the mid-20th century, it abandons the sleek 80s aesthetic and pop culture nostalgia that define the Menendez season, instead diving into a grimy, psychological horror tone reminiscent of Hitchcockian suspense. It's the kind of dark, atmospheric storytelling that better aligns with Murphy's vision of American monsters, not just in crime, but in cultural mythmaking. A misstep that still haunts Netflix. Looking back 1 year later, Monsters, the Lyle and Eric Menendez story, stands out as an experiment that misunderstood its own premise. It wasn't a failure in craftsmanship, the performances were strong, the direction stylish, but a failure of concept. By trying to force a family tragedy into a horror anthology about serial killers, Netflix blurred the line between empathy and exploitation. As the Ed Gein story takes center stage, it serves as both a course correction and a reminder of why the Menendez season faltered. Not every true crime belongs in the same monstrous frame. The anthology's power lies not in glamorizing violence, but in interrogating what makes someone, or something, truly monstrous. And in that respect, monsters. The Menendez Brothers Story remains Netflix's most fascinating, frustrating mistake.